Yes, I've already tripped on that one today. Actually, and I think I have Bruce White here, Madam Mayor, with me. And between us, I think we have 20 minutes.
Oh, is he?
Yes, he's next. You've got two boring old accountants at the end of the table.
Sorry, I've got a less up-to-date one. Oh, I see. So you're going to do it together,
yep.
A late change,
yep.
Right.
And we will do a song and dance act together. It'll be, thank you very much for receiving us this morning, and it'll be interesting for you that you've got two accountants at the end of the table who are mostly going to talk about process. The long-term plan, I think, is just a base case. It really does need significant work after the 1st of July. And I consider that you should be completely reviewing your asset management plans. I was here when they started in 2002, and at the time, and I've sat in your position, it was impossible to take it all in. And I saw projects rejected at the table, resurrecting themselves as a staff-promoted plan, and we had no way of stopping them. So you're sitting in front of you with asset management plans with all the fancy glitter all around them, that they're an amalgam of conservatism. So you have engineers over-engineering, you have accountants providing for all sorts of things that might not exist. You've got auditors coming in, influencing your plans, and then you've got interference by government departments. I think that the figures you've got in front of you are beyond conservatism. And so I think it's really important that you actually start a process where you rethink your capital projects. I watched in horror at the Flockton Basin process. Bruce might like to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't want to comment on the technical aspect of Flockton Basin, but what actually really horrified me was the way in which I think I was probably the only critique of that project, and the way in which it was handled, and particularly in front of your council here, being allowed 5 minutes as the only critical analyst of the project, whereas the engineers had probably 5.5 days type of thing. And so in terms of decision making, a complete imbalance, as I saw it, of analysis and presentation.
So, for instance, when you heard this morning a local resident at Templeton saying, this is what you could do that would be quite simple, that's on the ground comment, and you are it is almost impossible for you to actually pick that idea up. So, I believe that with the base case, I think you need to pick some big lofty stuff up and say, now look, maybe, and this is my idea, you'll probably reject it, but maybe you draw a line around Fendleton and Maryvale and you say, from there to the east, which starts off at Littleton, from there to the east, that's your capital project for the next 10 years. And the rest of the city, it's maintenance, and then you focus on what is broken. Maybe you need to look at a bald thing like a 10% reduction in OPEX. What would that look like? Because it's very easy to take the money off the art gallery, but you will be wasting money on engineering all over the place, which is miles more than what you took off the art gallery. Second point I want to make is about the CERA, the rationale for the government involvement. The previous council caused the government to have to set up CERA. It had no other option. But it's now time for the key projects to be reviewed. There are large central city projects which we all know need review. If the figure of 420 million in this morning's paper is correct, then I can report to you quite clearly...
Is that the overspend, potential overspend on the new cost of the
It's the new cost of the convention centre.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I haven't read the article in full.
Yeah, I did. I thought, God, has somebody written this so that I can come along and comment on it? We struggled to make a $20 million convention centre pay councillors. It's very difficult to actually make that sort of centre pay. And this, in my opinion, will require a subsidy of between 20 and 40 million per annum, and I think that's cautious. Who's going to pay for that? Per annum, forever. So you actually have to, it is time to stop, and I'll come back to that in a minute. You're inheriting a sports and recreation centre. Should you not be having a hard look at the costing and the operating costs of it? And the other thing is, don't let the red zone be a judder to the east. I've already had large organisations comment to me about their views on the east. And it'll be eaten up by big organisations unless the council stands up and says, this is our city. Government, we want to work closely with you. Because I actually think the government's there in good faith, and we need to actually, as a city, step up and say, we are your match. Councillors requested under the Official Information Act, something that probably most of you haven't got, but it was a letter by the Mayor and a letter by the Chief Executive to the Minister and to the CEO of CERA. And all of the issues that we have been talking about here and that you've been talking about the other day, over the last few days rather, the government was told about them on the 19th of March, and the Chief Executive of CERA was told about them on the 19th of February, and it's really important that the government now steps up to the mark. Don't think you are the junior party. Do not think that for a minute. You just work out how much this council is paying for, and then work out how much the net cost to the government is. You work out the GST on 40 billion, you work out the PAYE on enormous wages, you work out the company profits and the multiplication factor, the government saving and benefits, etc. The government's contribution will probably be about the same as the Christchurch City Council. You may be in front. So I believe it's time for the City Council to step up. You need to show leadership. I think it's time to call for the Shipley Commission to get CERA and the City Council together. There are lots of excellent people in both organisations, and you actually need to say to them, we're in this together. We live here and we're really keen. I know Jenny Shipley. I have a lot of time for her. I think she would actually welcome, she's a woman from Canterbury, and she would welcome this sort of opportunity. I think it's really important that it's made apolitical. This isn't about political party membership. This is about the future of our city for our kids. The old council was largely thrown out by the ratepayers of Christchurch because people didn't see them standing up and being counted. Well, some were, and they got back in. But the ratepayers of Christchurch expect you to take the risks and to take control and to show bold leadership.
If I could just talk about the processes and where I think the council really needs to focus a little bit. And as Garry said, we're both accountants of old, but it's more processes that we're interested in. And I've got just a printout here of a document, and I'll just read something that's really important. We hear talk about culture and needing to change and all that sort of thing. Values form the basis of our organisational culture. Now, I just agree wholeheartedly with that statement, right? This document is actually on the council website. It's actually the council's vision, values and goals document. And the interesting thing is, it's dated, it's 10 years old. And so it happened, it was put together when Garry was the mayor. It's actually due for the next review, February 2012. We've gotten to review it. And why I bring that up is the council's values are really important. So I just want to focus on one value, or two values, transparency and responsibility. And we hear about transparency. And with a couple of things I've looked at in council, transparency just hasn't happened. One project, 134 days to get official information. another 113 days, and another that could have been answered very quickly, or the bit I got very, very quickly, 23 days. Now that isn't transparency at all. It's very, very serious, and as a person with not a heck of a lot of time to devote to these things, I've got business activities that I'm fully involved in. It's so hard to be involved, and yet public participation is the future key to the community rebuilding, to community resilience. And out in the community, you've got all sorts of resources and knowledge. But transparency is really important, and it needs to be taken far more seriously.
The next point we want to cover is development authority. We completely support this. This is an excellent vehicle. We think it needs to have, it's important that it has commercial prudence. It's important that it has accountability, but that it will promote decent public-private partnerships. And the role of local government is the long view, and the role of the private sector is the efficiency. And that can be achieved through this organisation, and we applaud it. Next point we want to talk about is collaboration and partnership. It's really important that you develop collaborative planning framework with ECAN, particularly over our water. And local authorities are expected to collaborate, but it's also important to have public participation. We must rediscover our villages. Our planning should go back to where people live. And we applaud the strengthening of community boards. It's just excellent. But with that strengthening must go the financial costs of their decision making. So if they end up causing legal costs, those legal costs come out of the community board budget, not out of some central budget somewhere. The local knowledge will be, well, I mean, you just heard it in Templeton before, it's just amazing. And people, when they are engaged, just add so much. And then we can tap into networks. And if I talked about the Enable network, came out of a billionaire who lives in Christchurch, who lived here for 6 weeks of the year to play golf, who gave me advice when I was looking at, I'd seen in Seattle and Shanghai, I saw a ports authority, seaport, airport, data port, all controlled by the public sector and the power companies, and they were all, the private sector and the residents received the benefit from that. And the guy that gave me that advice was Sachio Samoto, who has broke NTT in Japan, who lives in Christchurch. We need to actually look at systemic issues as a council, and we need to actually look at council processes and allow a critical review. You've got 320 people earning more than $100,000. You've got 130 staff in your IT section. Be careful with your reviews, however, because consultants are predators often, and they will tell you what you want. Brave consultants will tell you often what makes you awkward. So in conclusion, I think it's important that we frame the debate away from huge rate increases and key asset sales. I personally believe that Red Bus and City Care don't need to be kept as assets. Who are potential strategic partners? But can you get a greater dividend out of CCHL? Those are all debates and discussions that need to be taken over a longer period than just this time. And that's why we're saying start on the 1st of July. We believe that we should change to a discussion about smaller rate increases, much more effective operating expenditure, prudent capital expenditure, that you take that big hump that you've got at the moment, cut the top off that hump, look at some assets sales, and timing is, I think you could do this within the next year, so that at the end of this time next year we sit here and we say although we are required as a city under the Local Government Act to do what's being done right now, we actually believe that we need one more year to actually get it right. And then you will all benefit from being elected back into office because you've done the right thing. Thank you.
If we stand, so the first question, I mean, it's great to have a former mayor, because to have that sort of knowledge, I rely on Vicky a lot, but she goes back even further than you do in that regard.
She's much more ancient than me.
No. I knew I'd stutter out. But I mean, I tend to agree. I think that part of the issue is possibly the framework for decision making. So, I mean, just from your perspective, having been through what we've been through as a city, would you require our city to go through a standard long-term planning process, or would you perhaps call a halt for a bit more of an intelligent assessment of the long-term needs of the city? And the second question is, do you think it was a mistake then to have a 3-year unaudited plan, which really set us up for the surprise of our lives in terms of what the previous council had budgeted for, but also signed up for without any assurance around insurance?
Yeah, first of all, I think you inherited something that was pretty difficult to see your way out of, and I think anyone would admit that. I just think that it's important that you use the Shipley, is it commission or what?
No, it's an advisory board on transition, which I'm on.
I think it's important that advisory board is almost brought out into the public, and that you... And Jenny will be well used to public scrutiny, and that you deliberate in public, because I was at a meeting the other night and it was staggering the amount of keen enthusiasm by people to participate. People are dead keen to participate, and you need to create the vehicles that everyone can participate in. And another thing that's important is don't all do the same thing, but trust each other to do the right thing. So you set things up in a way where you are all doing different things. And like I've been, I'm involved in housing now, I've been really impressed at the enthusiasm councillors have demonstrated towards affordable housing and social housing and what you're doing. It's just great. And keep that up, but start looking at your processes and your structures in the same way. I think it's unfortunate that your chief executive inherited a restructure that made her job almost impossible. But I think that it might be time to stand back and say, was that done properly?
I wonder if I could just add, I'm obviously don't have a council background, I've got a business background. But I sense that on the public participation side, there's a real need to get the expertise that's available out there, and don't fear doing that. I've run large organisations, and it's amazing where the comments might come from, the valuable comments. They don't come through the normal channels. And as I say that, I can remember somebody making a really critical comment. I think it was the only decent comment in about 5 years, but it was worth its weight in gold. So you never know where a bit of wisdom, a bit of knowledge will come from, and don't fear it.
Yeah, Andrew.
Thank you very much indeed for your submission, and Garry for sharing your thoughts with us in the context of your previous mayoral experience. It's really, really valuable. I just had one question in relation to your written submission, point number 7. One of the things that I've suggested as a way of dealing with the capital programme is that we should look at each budget and we should prioritise it, and then we should draw a line through it at a certain percentage point, and everything below that line would drop off. So the projects with least priority would drop off. Is that what you're suggesting in point number 7 in your written submission?
Yeah, absolutely. I introduced zero-based budgeting to Christchurch Polytechnic in the late 70s, and that's exactly what we did. We put top priority to bottom priority, and we costed alongside them. And you cut off at the point where your budget runs out. People expect you to be prudent. But the other thing, what is your priority and what's your staff's priority is often quite different. And I think that it is time to start challenging staff priorities, particularly in engineering.
But I think that we need external assistance for that. And I mean, none of us are engineers. And I think that there has to be, and because your point, Bruce, and it's probably the most frustrating thing is to say to somebody, you've got 5 minutes, your 5 minutes starts now, when precisely you're trying to provide what is essentially contestable advice. And it is difficult to find contestable advice. And I think that that shouldn't be done in an open, sort of like council setting, but maybe in a workshop run by the relevant committee. And maybe the relevant committee should have some external expertise brought onto them as seconded members of those committees to help good decision making. I think that you've raised a number of points that actually go to the quality of the decision making frameworks and how we do enable public participation, but also allow well-informed decision making. Because I don't necessarily think that my opinion on a engineering matter is going to be necessarily something that's going to lead to the best result for Christchurch. So we've got a huge job ahead of us.
And it is allowing for that critique in every area.
Yeah, but without blame or without rancor,
absolutely. And that's where transparency and the willingness to provide information and discuss is so important. And the example I gave originally, or we raised, that just didn't happen. And that's part of the problem. So if you overcome that and embrace the community, embrace whatever expertise is out there, you will end up with the city really on your side and moving forward.
But we do have incredibly good staff, really expert, really high quality. And sometimes what happens is that in the context of dealing with a problem, you can't see the impact that it has elsewhere. So,
but I've also seen incredibly good staff stifled by this organisational structure.
Yes,
and often incredibly good staff aren't promoted because they're an irritant.
Well, thank you for that contribution, former Mayor Garry Moore, and that is a note to end on. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And could I invite the